Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation. I'm Kevin Gosztola, Shadowproof Managing Editor, and I'm pleased to be joined by Andrew Perez, who is with the Daily Poster, and he's joining us to discuss what's going on with these survival checks and the Democrats backing away from it, and whether Joe Biden and the Democrats are even going to end up backing these checks in the end. So, and we have some other stories that we'll get to after that. But thank you for joining, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I've been following your critical work with the Daily Poster and everything you've all been doing with David Sirota and Walker Bragman and Julia Rock to build up this publication. And it's always good to see what you are publishing next. And so you've been on top of these survival checks. Before we get too far away from all of this, I want to play the clip of Joe Biden at the runoff rally, the rally for the Georgia runoff elections, and just make sure that everyone is clear on what Joe Biden has said about the checks and the kind of number he's willing to support. And so just, if I can get this up here, I will. I'm my own producer, so we have a little bit of a lag here, but everyone is. So I'm just going to put up this video, but yeah. So we know that when he was at this rally, he mentioned that he was for these checks and held them out as part of a campaign promise. So if we can pull this up here, I'll play the. It's going to give me an advertisement while I'm trying to play this clip. Isn't live streaming fun, guys? I don't know why.
Okay, W2's just a few.
Well, you know what? What if I do it this way? Is it even that worth it? Okay, so here, I was gonna play it, but it's kind of frustrating. So the whole thing was that he goes before the people who are at the rally, and he says that if you elect Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, there will be 2,000 checks that will be able to go out immediately. And he even says after that if you put David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, if you send them back to the Senate, then that's going to mean you won't get the checks. So he was pretty clear about it. But we've spent the last several days debating whether that meant, we're going to add $1,400 to the $600 that people already got back in December. And there's some discussion about whether this was a lie or not. So, beyond this whole debate about whether Joe Biden is lying to people or not, I think the critical thing that you've been focusing on is, how things seem to be shifting away from sending a large amount of money to people so that they can have immediate aid. So get into that.
Yeah. Well, so, it seems like, I think what Democrats would argue is that Joe Biden was always sort of trying to leave some wiggle room. And, quickly after, what he said in Georgia, where he promised $2,000 checks, they, then narrowed it down to mean $1,400 in new relief, with the expectation that people would just sort of credit Democrats for the $600 checks that went out the door in December with Donald Trump's name on them. This time I received a physical check, and it did indeed have Donald Trump's name on it. So there is that issue. That's definitely you're looking at under delivering for people who were promised a certain thing. But there's been a separate issue. I think Joe Manchin probably helped to kick off this conversation about saying that the checks need to be better targeted. That the stimulus right now is going to people who don't need help. And I think while there's some of that, I think there's a pretty big question of how we determine who needs help right now. In that, the IRS or the Treasury Department is sending these checks out based on people's 2019 income in the last, round of checks. So I think it's pretty difficult for them to determine who needs help today, on that basis, looking at data from 2019 before the pandemic, started forcing mass shutdowns in the U.S. So that's one issue. And so the Biden administration has actually indicated a couple times, both Joe Biden and Brian Deese, who's the National Economic Council director, they've said a number of times in recent weeks that they're open to kind of modifying the terms of who's eligible for stimulus checks. In the past, the checks have been going to individuals who earned up, full checks have been going to individuals who earned up to $75,000, and full checks have been going to couples who earned up to $150,000. And they've sort of expressed that they would be willing to change those terms. And just yesterday, Senate Republicans unveiled their own proposal, looking to gut these checks. Basically, they would limit them to full checks to people who earned $40,000 and couples who earned up to $80,000. And after that, they start phasing out pretty quickly. So, the end result of that is that, what's kind of a near universal program right now would be limited to, poorer families mostly, and it would effectively throw out like tens of millions of people who received checks in the last few rounds. I think it's about 80 million people, according to like a pretty rough new estimate from the Institute from ITEP is their name. So that's sort of where we're at right now. But I guess there is some good news here in that at least there have been some stories today about how some people in the Biden administration, like some of his advisors, are skeptical about the checks entirely. Like think that they're taking up too much of the COVID relief bill that they've proposed, the 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that they've proposed. But it sounds like Biden is at least committed to the concept, because he told people this check is coming. But it also sounds like he according to Bloomberg, they were saying that he thinks that it's like a form of tangible relief, and much better at that than like a tax credit that people don't really know they benefited from.
Okay, so I mean, that at least says that they're starting to understand and recognize the value of the concept. So I wanted to go through a couple examples of what we're dealing with here with Republicans, who obviously, it seems to me, and you can tell me if you disagree, but it looks like they're very savvy and understand that Biden's made these overtures about unity, and they really want to push him on this being a bipartisan deal. So if it's something that Democrats come up with without Republicans, they want to nail him. And it's not really even about what they are able to accept in the bill as much as it's, they want to be able to make their mark and have and show that they have political power under a Biden administration and that they can get him to bend to what they want from Congress. So we've got Republicans who are out there saying things that they are being highly critical of the checks, like Rob Portman, who is making similar arguments like what we're hearing from Joe Manchin. But I wanted to raise Rob Portman as an example because in our media, we have been following Rob Portman because he's going to retire from the Senate and no longer be there. So I wanted to play this clip from, I believe I did this correctly, but let me just do it one more time. And okay, so if this works on live television or on live broadcast, we're going to hear Casey Hunt's voice, and she says some amazing things about Rob Portman.
And as we wrap up here, I just want to take a moment to reflect on what it means that Senator Rob Portman, who many of you probably know, some of you I'm sure do not, but he is someone that I've covered for many years. He has been a serious legislator who has worked with other people across the aisle on incredibly important issues, and he's leaving. And he says it's because it's a hard time to be a public servant. Our government is only as good as the people who are willing to come here and serve us in it. And if we create an atmosphere where good people no longer want to be here serving us, we're the ones that are going to suffer. Let's just keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you so much for getting up way too early with us on this Tuesday morning.
I just think that that's one of the more ridiculous things I've seen on my television in the last week, especially when Rob Portman is out there. I mean, there's this whole history of what he's done as a politician, as a senator, but now he's one of the leading voices obstructing getting checks to people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of his, more memorable acts as a senator is going to be attempting to gut, these checks and make sure that 80 million people can't get them. I mean, he's a completely indistinguished senator. Like, no different from any of these people. It's the most asinine, absurd conversation possible.
And just so we're clear on who Rob Portman is before I move on to the other Republican example of the day, which is actually puts Rob Portman to shame, is, and then puts Joe Manchin to shame as well, is that Rob Portman is, a kind of Christian evangelical, right-wing evangelical. He's somebody who's a climate denier, if you look at his voting issues, and again, just very corporate and gutting protections for workers. So if this is the kind of example, the shining example of a servant, of a public servant in the Senate, I mean, I think like that's one way it's pretty clear that if this is who is deified and this is who Biden's supposed to work with or seek people out like this, it's like we're going to see Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney constantly elevated as the people that are to be compromised with, and to like when they oppose the left, we're supposed to take them seriously because they are the reasonable folks. They're the reasonable opposition, right?
Yeah, it's a great gauge for like how absolutely screwed up our politics are, that, like a fairly conservative senator is getting these like, statesman like coverage. It's hard to stomach.
Okay. So then the other thing I wanted to play here is we've got, while as we go to talk here, we've got, Governor Jim Justice has been making the rounds from he's the governor of West Virginia, and and that's remarkable because that's where Joe Manchin is from, and so
and he famously changed parties too. Like just a couple years ago, he was a Democrat, and changed parties to the Republican Party, and now he's putting Joe Manchin to shame.
Okay, so. And again, like, just to be clear here, I always want to be careful that I don't say more positive things than, suddenly someone will be like, well, Jim Justice is this. Well, I mean, obviously, like, he and Joe Manchin are always, in my opinion, going to be horrible people so long as they're in the pocket of the coal industry. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to suggest that we see him as some kind of leader of any kind of movement. But I want to play what he's been saying on CNN, and then he went on MSNBC and he actually backed this up and said, no, I'm not taking this back. This is what I have to say about the checks. And so here we go. Let's hear from Jim Justice.
For Americans right now, it's critical to your folks in West Virginia. You've been clear about your desire to support President Biden, to work across the aisle. when it comes to this COVID relief bill, I wonder what is more important to the people of West Virginia and to you, that Biden's $1.9 trillion bill passes, even if it's without Republican support and through reconciliation, which would mean bigger checks to your folks in need, or that it's a bipartisan agreement, even if it's less money?
Well, first and foremost, I wish we'd all come together, and that's just not blowing smoke. I mean, that's just because I don't do that. But the other flip side of it is this, is Poppy, we've got a lot of people in West Virginia that are still struggling with paying their power bill because they got laid off because this pandemic just swept their job away from them.
Right, so which one is it?
And I mean, at the end of the day, really and truly, Poppy, what we need to do is we need to understand that trying to be per se fiscally responsible at this point in time with what we've got going on in this country, if we actually throw away some money right now, so what? We have really got to move and get people taken care of and get people back on balance. And I want to work with the Biden administration, just like I worked with the Trump administration, and I want to move forward.
That's really significant to hear from a Republican.
Okay, so that's basically what he said there, and it's a pretty big deal, especially at a moment when it seemed like there was this pull towards increased means testing and increased limitations on getting the checks out to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, it's definitely significant, and I think he went on a little bit further in the conversation to say that like Joe Manchin's push for further limiting these checks is like hard to fathom. Because a lot of people need help right now. And it's not just, people who were poor before the pandemic started. Those people definitely need help, but everyone needs help right now, or at least a lot of people. There's been this huge push in media to restrict eligibility, but also just to say that the recession is over for most or many Americans. And just, I don't know where these people live. It's hard to understand, really at all.
And that's one thing you've been tracking. You were tracking at the Daily Poster some of the commentary or coverage in the New York Times. You've been paying attention to some of the publications and picking up on these common themes against the checks or suggesting that we don't need them. Can you summarize what has been going on with the press, this establishment press for the last a week and a half? Seems like they've been laying this foundation for discouraging Americans from believing that this could be a good, valuable solution.
Yeah. I mean, for a couple of weeks now, there's been a push at the Washington Post and in the Bloomberg editorial boards to say that it's not the time for sending out these stimulus checks because things are getting better. Vaccines are happening, which it's hard to believe because so much of the news is centered around how the vaccination rollout has been a colossal nightmare. But yeah, so there's been a big push in elite media to say that these checks aren't necessary. And then last week there was a study that came out at this Harvard think tank called Opportunity Insights, where they said that households who were earning over $75,000 didn't immediately spend the entire $600 check they got from the government. That just started going out, I guess, end of December. I think most people have probably received them by now, but it's not. Not everyone was getting them immediately. So it's hard to track how they came up with this figure, but they then turned that into this push to restrict individuals who the economists suggested restricting checks to people who earned less than $50,000 and couples who earned less than $75,000. And the new Republican proposals somewhat similar to that. But if you were to go that route, that would actually cut off about half of the country from these stimulus checks. Just from census data, you can find that it's literally about half, and maybe more. Just because there are some single family households that are earning between $50,000 and $75,000 who might not get categorized that way. So yeah, they would cut off about half of the country, but all these all these news articles, like the Washington Post, like straight news articles in the Post and in Bloomberg are saying that like economists say it would be a really good idea to restrict these checks. And, you know, that's like, it just seems like that's what they're wishing for, right? Like they're wishing for economists to say that, you know, it would make sense to better target these checks in a way that would pretty hastily cut off just, you know, half of the population from relief. So it's been pretty crazy to watch. It hasn't been widely covered until the kind of last few days, until the kind of contours of what limiting eligibility would look like, which is, you know, half of people don't get checks. That's what it would look like. And again, this is all going to be based off of 2019 economic data. How do we know for a fact that people who were earning $75,000 in 2019, you know, had a great time during the pandemic, have just been saving cash, you know, saving it all, not spending? It's been pretty mystifying to watch, and the only kind of takeaway I think you can really have from it is that, you know, these people would prefer that you're near starving and living paycheck to paycheck, because it makes you, you know, just the best type of captive worker you can be. And that's, I mean, it's been pretty galling. You know, maybe the worst example last week came from Steve Ratner, who's just like one of my own like personal hobby horses. He was the Obama car czar, and he like quietly left the administration in 2009, and everyone's like, why does Steve leave? Well, a few months later, you know, it came out that Steve Ratner had arranged bribes in exchange for state pension business. And he ended up paying a $10 million settlement for paying bribes to score state pension business, like this, you know, investments that belong to state workers, that belong to public employees. It's their retirement savings. He was paying bribes to win it, to win pieces of that. And he now manages Mike Bloomberg's money, and he has, you know, the gall to suggest that, you know, it's like some people in the top 10% might receive a small benefit from these checks, and that's enough to means test it, you know, in a ridiculous way. And that just, I don't know, that to me was just incredibly offensive, and I can't believe that he can show his face in public.
There's been what it seems to me is deliberate efforts to misinform the public about what would happen when the checks go out, because it is bracketed, right? Once it gets above a certain income level, it starts to decrease. The amount of the check begins to decrease for those people. But yet, what's the example now? Something like if one of Mitt Romney's family members would get the check, but Mitt Romney's family is pretty well off and doesn't need the check, except that requires you to accept that person is even in that income bracket. Like, it's possible that family member might not even see a check.
Yeah. You know, what's funny is today I did reach out to Mitt Romney's office and to Joe Manchin's office to ask which mythical Mitt Romney son qualifies for these checks. I would like to know which of them is earning, you know, a regular person's income and not like getting like millions of dollars through passive investments every day of their lives. I would like to know. And they have not responded to me yet. So, but I'll let you know if they do.
All right, I'm going to be anxious to hear if they come clean on that. Or they're at least being used as a political football at this moment. So if it's not true, they might want to decide if isn't it Joe Manchin who is spreading this thing? They might want to tell him that he's wrong. I don't know. Maybe they don't care. But the other question from someone who is following our stream was just to raise the example in the press over the last week, what with the panic around people possibly putting some of their hard-earned money into the stock market to, you know, speculate and bet like rich folks and see if they can't make out. And you know, I've read some of the messages posted on the Reddits, and I've tried and stay a little grounded. While I find this all very hilarious and entertaining to watch, there's also some really I take them to be genuine. Very impactful pieces of writing and testimonials on these Reddit message boards of people talking about how, you know, they finally were. I mean, one example I can't get out of my head that I read doing the show last week was that someone said, I bought a half a share. It went up in GameStop. I sold it. And I was able to go to the grocery store and buy name brand food products for the first time in quite a while. And so anyways, we've got people who are doing segments on CNBC or Fox News and suggesting that the panic, the speculation from retail investors might be a reason not to send stimulus checks to people because they're just going to end up putting them into these stocks.
Yeah. Well, that really hasn't stopped, you know, the U.S. Congress from giving like special money to investors. Like, for instance, like real estate investors got a huge carve out in the 2017 Republican tax law, like just a huge tax break just for them. But I mean, you know, that's sort of besides the point. Like, in that the corporate tax rate was slashed, you know, massively by Republicans in 2017. You know, the tax brackets for the wealthiest people in the country were slashed in 2017. Were those people, you know, prohibited from putting their money into the stock market? Like, I would assume that they've continued to consolidate power and, you know, I don't know, just.
All right. So just another more befuddling kind of a claim from people like Leon Cooperman, right, of all people. Other thing that's great is when these people who are guilty of insider trading come on air and tell people like what amount of money they shouldn't be sent from Congress in order to help them get by, even though they've been enriching themselves through illegal means and are guilty of crimes. So I want to show everyone this other article that we're going to move to from you that you wrote. This is on the healthcare plan that is being proposed by Joe Biden. And so to begin here, you know, what I would ask you is to first, you know, set this up here. You know, he's moving forward, but he's not going to move forward with a public option. What can you say about, you know, why that is? But then what is this plan that is being backed instead of going forward with a public option, which, you know, by the way, everyone watching is going to know and realize the public option is not Medicare for all Americans. It's like a miniature kind of a form that people might be able to get into with the government being involved. But what is this plan instead of his promise for a public option?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, I guess it is possible that they will introduce a public option bill. I will say that, but, you know, I've honestly, we've heard that the prospects of, you know, even the, like, you know, Democratic Congress right now introducing and rallying behind a public option bill are fairly slim. It actually sounds like the thing that they're more likely to do would be to lower the Medicare age, which, you know, probably a good thing, but it also doesn't help people who are you or my age, at least not for a few decades. But so what they're doing in the meantime as part of the COVID relief bill is it's sort of a two-pronged plan. They want to subsidize COBRA to help people pay to stay on their employer-based health insurance plans once they've lost their job, because, you know, you don't want people losing their health insurance plans in the middle of a pandemic that, you know, which we've seen a lot of right now. But the other part of it is that they want to put a lot of money towards subsidies to put people on, to have people buy insurance plans through the Affordable Care Act exchanges, you know, the Obamacare marketplace. Which is how I buy my health insurance right now, and it's a really massively expensive way to get health insurance. The plans are all, you know, you're paying anywhere between like $300 to $500 on premiums, even when you're my age. I'm in my 30s, and they have massive deductibles, which is really where they get you, and out-of-pocket maximums. And so that's the plan right now, is that they want to put all these people onto potentially millions of people is what they're talking about, putting them on these ACA marketplace exchange plans that are very expensive, and that, you know, are a big chunk of the people who are on these plans are what you would consider underinsured, where they have insurance, but they can't actually pay to use it. Like, no, they just can't afford the out-of-pocket maximums, you know, that you might incur if you have, you know, a health emergency, or a real health emergency and need to go to the hospital. So that's, you know, it's a plan that some House Democrats have like sort of rallied behind in the past. I think there was sort of similar provisions in the HEROES Act, or the HEROES Act 2.0 from House Democrats that was blocked by Senate Republicans last year. And so, you know, it's a plan that sounds good, pay money to help people get insurance, but the problem is you are putting people on plans they won't necessarily be able to use. And I mean, it also, one other potential issue with it is just that, you know, it could suck up all the life from like any other type of reform push. You know, if you've, you know, removed a huge chunk of the uninsured population and put them on insurance plans, like, you know, my own interpretation from, you know, living through the Obama administration is like, that's it. That's your ball game. Like, you get one big chance in healthcare, and it's not going to happen again. It doesn't come up again, especially because, you know, you might lose control of Congress within the next 2 years. So it's, you know, it's the kind of moderate plan. And I should also say this, you know, who likes this plan? Health insurance lobbying groups. Right. Like the America's Health Insurance Plans, which is AHIP, and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association are both lobbying Congress for this. They want new subsidies to put people on coverage. And it's a great deal for them, right? Like, best deal possible. Like the government's paying the premiums, and people probably still won't be using the insurance. So it's a potential jackpot for them.
And this seems to be what they increasingly favor, because obviously the most nightmare scenario is going to a Medicare for all system. And so, well, if we could just get the government to give us subsidies, and then maybe we can keep the skyrocketing rates going up at a lower, like, kind of a trajectory, I guess. My question to you is, you know, you're reminding people of what went on under Obama and how he had one attempt, or really one shot, to deal with the health care crisis in the United States. And he chose to force people into paying private insurance plans. And if they didn't, then they would receive a tax penalty. And so, are there any lessons learned at the moment? Is there any sign that any of the Democrat, or is there anyone at least saying that, you know, what you're saying, which is, this is a big crisis, and what we do has to be more than just tinkering with the ACA legislation or the Affordable Care Act legislation, because, you know, like you say, we're only going to pass one thing that deals with healthcare. So if it's like, we're going to just pass a slush fund that adds to the ACA, well, maybe there's much more that they could do. And then they're going to find like a few months from now that they wish they had done more for the public.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be really difficult. And, you know, one more reason why it'll be so difficult, already, you know, health insurance companies have just seen their profits just, you know, jackpot this year, because people are not going to the doctor if they can avoid it. They're just, why would you go to the hospital in the middle of a pandemic when, you know, like, everyone there has COVID? Pretty obvious.
Yeah, I mean, who's going for their yearly physicals during a pandemic? I mean, that was a big deal about the Affordable Care Act, was that it would cover, you know, the one time you could go see your doctor to get a preventative exam, right? You have one time that you can go see a doctor without having some of the extra fees that you get for, like, it's really crazy, because, like, if you're sick, you don't go to the doctor, but if you aren't sick, you could go get this physical examination, and they'll tell you if you're healthy or not.
Yeah. Well, so insurance companies are having huge profits right now. And if you were to pass this, massive ACA expansion, it would be an additional profit center for them. It would just be like just way more money getting shoveled into insurance companies. So what you're actually doing is, by giving them all this money, you're making it so much more difficult to actually pass any kind of reforms in a number of ways, because they're going to have all this money to put against it. And AHIP, who's requesting this massive expansion, they spent $100 million to kill a public option between 2009 and 2010, and they were able to retain a seat at the negotiating table with the Obama administration because they didn't say they were spending $100 million. They secretly funneled it to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to run this massive campaign, both TV, radio, grassroots, AstroTurf organizing, just whole full service campaign against a public option plan. And right now they're going to have so much more money than they did then to do that. And there's, they have a group already that organized against Medicare for All in the Democratic primaries called the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future. And that front group has, indicated it'll spend the public option into the ground the same way. And in fact, they did last year. They created a state nonprofit that spent virtually the same amount of money as they did on Medicare for All, opposition advertisements. They spent the same amount of money in Colorado to kill a local state level public option bill. So they, while it's not an ideal policy, it poses a legitimate threat to their profits and their market share, and just their ability to just gouge people and to deny their claims and to just put people through the ringer. So they will spend against it, and it's Democrats are looking at plans that would enrich them and enrich their capacity to spend against any new reforms.
And so another story you worked on is the story on the Biden ethics order that was issued and what that might mean for people as far as their involvement in lobbying. It was supposedly supposed to be for cracking down on what could be called shadow lobbying and closing revolving door loopholes. So can you discuss this ethics order that was issued, and obviously what wasn't in the ethics order? You outline what was in it and then what was missing, because everyone knows the devil is in the details, and if it's if it doesn't say a certain thing, then it's going to allow for people to continue doing that activity that we thought we were going to make unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, there is one sort of high level positive development with the Biden ethics plan. And that's, so it's designed to crack down on what they call shadow lobbying. And that the whole idea behind that is that, a senator leaves the Senate and tomorrow joins Patton Boggs and, becomes heading their Office of Regulatory Reform and is a strategic advisor in there. And their job is telling other lobbyists, here's how you influence my colleagues, the people I worked with up until a week ago. And it's a way that politicians and also White House staff have used to sort of subvert revolving door rules that would, that require you to have some type of cooling off period before you join the corporate world and help them gobble up government cash or prevent, any kind of reform. But so, that's a positive step. They've looked to crack down on that just because it's one of the more notorious Washington loopholes. But, if you actually look at Joe Biden's staff, what a lot of them are these Obama holdovers, especially in the cabinet, who after their time in the Obama administration, they didn't just become shadow lobbyists. They went a slightly different route where they became corporate consultants, offering advice to companies and never registering to lobby. Their companies did not lobby technically, but they were providing Tony Blinken helped found this, who's now Biden's Secretary of State, helped found this firm called West Exec, and they represented, defense contractors, some Wall Street firms like the Blackstone Group, including Boeing. One of his clients was Boeing, and if you're the Secretary of State, like one of your main jobs is actually unloading Boeing planes around the world, like. Both, you approve weapons deals, but you also help sell their jets to like foreign airlines, which is always good when Boeing has a massive issue like they have over the last couple of years in their production facilities, in their production with like the new Dreamliner plane. But so that's like going to be a big part of your job, and that kind of work, doing that kind of corporate consulting work is not limited in any way by the Biden ethics pledge. So they kind of like, they won't be able to do the standard shadow lobbying thing, but they can easily do corporate consulting when they leave their job. And I'm sure they'll be sought after. The other thing they could do is what Janet Yellen did, which is give just, speaking paid speeches to anyone who will have you. And, that's not covered under the ethics pledge in any way. And Janet Yellen is basically within her own sort of ethics pledge. She has pledged to sort of take a 1-year cooling off period between, like saying she won't work with, like involve herself in any specific matters that involve the companies she gave paid speeches to. But she, unless she seeks written authorization, which is a pretty limited pledge. If you're saying like, I will seek written authorization to work with Citadel, basically to deal with Citadel, right, which is obviously coming up right now in the news because they're one of the people who backstopped the hedge fund that was shorting GameStop, famously shorting GameStop.
Yeah, they made that. And then they ended up being wrong, and they don't want to have to see their entire head go under. Basically, they don't want to take responsibility for failing at the bet. So then, but the other thing I heard is, we hear all of it because obviously a lot of what we're getting at here. The corporate influence of politics, but then there's a intersection of our own public officials unwilling to take responsibility or be held accountable and be held to these standards, which is why we hear ridiculous things. Jen Psaki saying, that well, Janet Yellen is a woman, so like we should probably like let her make that money from giving speeches to these, because men have been doing this for decades. So, a woman should get a chance to engage in this kind of, enriching themselves, I suppose. I don't know. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but they're completely grasping for straws in order to dodge having any kinds of restrictions. Right, like they're constantly trying to innovate how they can maintain the status quo for how all these officials act, because we've got people doing this journalism, and we've got a public that increasingly can see this conduct for what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things I no longer live in DC, but I used to try to go to like lobbying group conferences anytime I could just to see who is speaking to them. Just because they're the like most insane, craven types of cash grabs you could possibly do. Like people get paid like tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to sit on a panel telling a whole bunch of executives like nothing that they don't know, just giving their opinion. And they're there for like a half hour, 45 minutes, and it's over. And they walk away with huge checks. And people do this with corporate lobbying groups. We recently did a story looking at private equity firms because we managed to get a couple of conference agendas from them. And yeah, we found a whole lot of big media personalities are, making the rounds, talking to groups like companies like the Carlyle Group and the Blackstone Group, really, really powerful private equity firms with interests in like all throughout government and in media coverage too. And yeah, people do these cash grabs with them secretly. No one knows what happens. You only find out about these speaking fees for the most part when someone, just signs an ethics form where they have to disclose their clients and who they've been speaking to. So it's really a disturbing thing that happens in the Beltway that people just accept as normal and fine because it's normal.
Yeah. Or maybe it leaks to the press, or maybe somebody gets hacked and emails end up online, and you figure out what Hillary Clinton's saying to Goldman Sachs and her something like that. But yeah, it's highly secretive. And I think they know that they know that if we could read what they're saying, because a lot of these are private, or can be private, or they also know that if we saw the obscene amounts that they're being paid for these speeches, people would be offended. So I wanted to close by asking you this question as someone working for the Daily Post. Now that Joe Biden is elected and we're in the post-Trump era, what kind of change have you seen in the way people consume your work and because it does seem like we're there now where people are very finicky and particular about what you write and publish, and they don't want you to be too good at holding Biden accountable, because we're supposed to like give him a certain amount of room to work here 100 days. And so like if you say things like he promised $2,000 check and now he's saying he's not going to be for that, people get really sensitive and start to just flail about and say to you that you're being too harsh on Joe Biden. That I imagine that's something that obviously you're just going to ignore it for the most part, but what does that do for an organization that is committed to following the money in politics?
Yeah, I mean, it really hasn't been bad for us so far. There's definitely a big segment of liberals who, want to go back to brunch. Like, corruption is out. No one cares. No one cares about this. Like, why didn't anyone cover Trump's corruption, which obviously happened quite a bit. But, I think it's actually an opportunity for us. I think a lot of media outlets are going to sort of sit out the next 2 years, or at least, pull their punches, and it gives us, more content to write. And honestly, I think our readers have, by and large, appreciated it. Like, I don't think they're there because they want, people to tell them, things are good, or, everything's going to be fine. Joe Biden's got this. Like, I don't think our readers want that, fortunately. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously going to be some of that in, on any given day, maybe we'll get kind of annoyed by it. I heard we lost like a subscriber or two when we covered Biden's healthcare plan. But I don't know.
Well, I suppose that it's probably not any more than it was when Trump was president, because there was always this pressure to be kinder to Democrats anyways, because Trump was worse. And so I think the thing that is slightly horrific, I mean, not the worst thing out there in this world, but something that is that is frustrating, is this idea that we aren't allowed to raise our expectations for Joe Biden and his presidency in the work that we're doing, the journalism that we produce, and our commentary, because at least he's not Donald Trump, like, but then the bar is like so horribly low, right? Like, it's like under water and down at the bottom of the sea. And so it's like, oh, could Joe Biden ever fail that trick? I'm going to probably be Donald Trump. And so I think like the challenge for us is coming up with a principled way to do coverage where it isn't just like, okay, yes, he's not going to do the same things that Donald Trump did. That was an extraordinary period.
Yeah. One thing we did do, we've introduced a Friday newsletter for subscribers called "You Love to See It," where we basically are just going to only hit them with good news. And like, I guess internally, like, we want to give credit to Joe Biden when he does something good. They're looking to, like, we wrote a story a couple weeks ago about how they want to clarify that people can still, qualify for unemployment benefits if they, decide to leave their job because they don't feel safe, or because they, like, during the pandemic, or because they don't want to accept a certain job offer because of the pandemic, because they don't feel safe working in a certain environment, which is totally logical. But it's one way that the Trump administration crushed workers in the last year, was they said, you got to go back to work. It doesn't really matter if you feel safe. So that's a positive development, and it's one of those things where, like, when we see it, we will absolutely say, like, good work.
I mean, he immediately fired the National Labor Relations Board counsel, who was extremely hostile and also a servant for the corporate class. And so that's a big deal. And I share your opinions too, of, like, if it's something good, I think we just need to recognize that that it's a pleasant thing that this is being acknowledged as to be dealt with, or that the we were on has turned around. Like, for example, one I always thought was one of the worst possible aspects of Trump's administration was that they were so captured by the fossil fuel industry. We constantly were seeing environmental regulations that were decimated and overturned. And also there were chemical companies that won, like, incredible deregulation. And it looks like, I don't know how far they're going to go. And this is where some outlet like Daily Poster comes in, and you guys will do really good watchdog work. But there's executive action that can be taken to unravel a lot of what Trump did, because that's the route he took in the beginning. Like, most of the deregulation was executive action anyways. Some of it did make it through Congress, but for the most part, it was just him. It was just Donald Trump doing this. And then I suppose the EPA with Scott Pruitt and Andrew Wheeler, who was a coal lobbyist and things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, look, for what you do, I suppose that you have to acknowledge that we're in a better position already with a lot of the cabinet picks, because many of the people who are being appointed to run these agencies at least are not from the industries they're supposed to police or be conducting oversight. I mean, in my lifetime, I never would have thought that the EPA would be run by somebody who came from, like, the coal industry, but, like, that's what happened with Trump.
Yeah, the bar has been successfully lowered into the ground. Yeah.
All right, so I want to let you go, and thank you for giving me so much of your time to talk. Before you go off, let's plug the Daily Post very aggressively, that people know that that you're out there doing this work, where they can go to support you. I'll let you make the pitch.
Sure. Okay. Our website is dailyposter.com. The Twitter handle is dailyposter. You can find me at Andrew Perez, DC, even though I'm no longer in DC. I can't give up my verified Twitter badge yet. But yeah, please, if you like our work, please support it. We are fully grassroots funded, and we want to keep fighting the good fight. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you much for joining us. I'm gonna hop off now, everyone, and leave you all. So thank you for following this. This video will archive, and then if you're able to share it, that would be great, so that more people can be exposed to Andrew's work and the Daily Poster. Also, if you aren't a subscriber of Shadowproof's YouTube channel, please go click that subscribe button on our. And with that, I will say goodbye, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another stream. So thank you all.